to really kind of build on what Bob has said here and had the good fortune to interact kind of very broadly. And certainly Bob has been key in fostering this moving it along of how do we use standard process management to improve the outcomes on the PRRS infected breeding herds. So really this takes you back a couple of steps. Obviously we have a lot of PRRS, we deal with a lot of PRRS. Guys like me get really frustrated because we keep dealing with the same stuff over and over again. And so really started an initiative here about 3 years ago to say, how do we take all what we know in the scientific literature, get it in one spot, and get that down in a manner that we can repeat and see if it's effective, right? Because if I do the same thing over and over again, even if it's wrong, at least I'll figure out it's wrong. And if I do different things every time, I never figure out it's wrong because I never know what I did. And so with that mentality, that's really kind of how we got started down this path. So just as a backgrounder, this is some data that, this thing have a pointer? Oh, yeah, pointer. So on this axis is actually the percent of herds, and the red box would be the number of infected herds in a week. So this is new cases in a given week. This is a cumulative percent. And so this data set represents plus or minus a couple hundred sow farms, a couple of 600,000 sows plus or minus, kind of geographically spread out across the U.S. And this is a joint project between PRRS and ASV here, and it's really a pilot project to say what's going on. So if you look at this data, this is July 1. We had at least a few farms go PRRS positive this year. We're attempting to work through what this is going to look like for 2010, but obviously it's been a bad year. So we talk about elimination, we talk about control. It doesn't look very good. The other interesting pieces that we've seen on this is, if you really look at that break rate, it's about 3% a week, pretty steady. So we're kind of losing 3% of the sow farms in the Midwest every week, whether we like it or not. Really starting back here in mid-October, late November, kind of forward. So, and that looks like that's continued. So we're interested to know if that's happened. What can we do to control that? But more importantly, how do we take these herds that are positive and get back to negative? And that's how this whole project started. So let me give you some background and let me give you some biases. And I need to get you all the biases on the table before we start, because everybody's got a bias and everybody's got an axe to grind. And if you don't recognize that, they're maybe feeding you a line of bull. So let's get them out on the table so you know where mine are at. Number one, I deal with breed-to-wean herds and multi-site finishing production. Okay? So the caveats would be I don't work with farrow-to-finish herds ever. None in my daily practice. And so my mind whirls around breed-to-wean herd, multi-site grow-finish production. So take that as a caveat as a background. The other big caveats are, number one, there's only two kinds of sow farms. Those that are truly naive and those that are positive. Okay? We talk about positive stable. We heard that word thrown around a lot. The key part of that is that it's positive. It's positive, right? And so when we talk about stable, that to me means we have reproductive stability. It doesn't say very much about the pigs. Okay? I've got reproductive consistency. I get pigs out the door, but I don't know much about the pig status, and we'll talk about that in a second. This is the other key piece. These quote-unquote stable farms have positive pigs on a regular basis. Let me reemphasize that. They have pigs on a regular basis, and we don't test enough to figure it out. So I told you I live in a world where I've got sow farms and I've got all-in-a-lot finishing production, wean-to-finish batched pigs. So basically, I've got 26 replicates of any sow farm going at any one time, right? Maybe I got 2 weeks on the site, but basically I can start to understand what happens. So if I look at those pigs and I test out of my positive sow farms, on average, these positive sow farms spit out virus. A few infected pigs. They seroconvert late nursery to mid-finishing. So not very many infected pigs, maybe 1 or 2% at weaning. They do it for a period of about 3 to 6 weeks. And they do it every 6 to 18 months. And the interesting part is it's somewhat repeatable. If a farm spits out virus every 6 months, it kind of spits out virus every 6 months. If it spits out virus every 18 months, that's kind of what it does. They don't seem to fluctuate. So there's something different about those herds. We don't know what that is, but there's some characteristic there that does that. So where does this come back to? Well, number one, we know positive pigs. And I'm going to talk about Dr. Holtkamp's data here in a minute on the analysis of the Stephen County project, but I've got a reasonably robust data set with current market prices that would suggest these pigs that are positive coming into the sow farm got about a $6 bill hung on their head. They look okay. Incremental improvement, incremental increase in mortality, not quite as good a feed conversion, don't grow quite as well. None of it's terrible. They look pretty good. It's just if I match them up to their negative brethren about $6 a head more. So if you take that number, I think I kind of get back to my head that at the end of the day, we got to have negative sow farms. End of discussion, or I can't be competitive. And I don't mean competitive with the folks in this room. I mean competitive on a worldwide basis with our friends in China and with our friends in South America. So how am I competitive long term? And that key strategic competitive advantage is how do I run my sow farms negative and what technologies can I use to get there? So that's really what I want to spend the rest of the time talking about. Talk a little bit about economics here, and so I've given you my $6 number. So Daryl put some data together out of the Stevens County project, and he did a financial assessment. So somewhere between $75 and $255 a year was his number. So if we have positive pigs, right, active, so that's a stage 1 AASV categorization. Positive sows, positive pigs. $255 a sow a year. $10, right? 10, 11, 12 bucks in those models. That's sow herds and pigs. Frequently wean negative pigs, so in the periods when you've got positive sows but negative pigs, the positive sows cost you $78 a year. $3 a pig. Just for rounding math, right? So of this, I got a $10 bill or $11 bill here. I got a $3 bill here. $6, $7 on pigs. That makes about sense. Daryl also looked at said, what if I got negative pigs and they stay negative to market? That's a $4 advantage. If they go positive, they're negative at weaning, but they go positive, it's about $2 drag. That's probably about right. Today it's probably a little more than that. The finishing stuff that I've modeled here recently in Iowa, and they all go positive in Iowa for some reason. There's a bit more of a drag there compared to their contemporary groups. It's a bit hard to look at because you've got different energy diets, and so you've got to really make sure you're matching those things up. But their contemporaries fed in low-density areas that stay negative. We think it's a little more than $2, but not a lot. So whether it's $2 or $6 or $9, the point is a lot of jack, non-competitive jack, right? So how do I get competitive, and that's where we're at. So this is the ultimate question in my mind. Is test negative really negative? So I spend a lot of time talking about this with the folks I work with, and the basic argument is, are they truly negative or are they test negative? So can I test them negative? How many of you guys have bought feeder pigs, or wean pigs, excuse me, that are triple negative? That's my favorite thing, because I got hextuple negative pigs, right? You want some tests? I can run some tests. What does it say about their true status? Okay? Right? Having purchased a few of those triple negative pigs myself, they're not always quite as shiny as one may make them out to be. So it brings back this contradiction between test results and true status of the population. And I'm going to model through here in a second, but it's a couple $1 million in a 2,500 sow farm. Let me show you how we get to that. So this is the problem with sampling. Now, we can't test every pig all the time or we'd go broke. Well, the diagnostic labs would be really wealthy. Roger Main in Minnesota would just be so excited they wouldn't know what to do, with all the diagnostic testing. But we don't need to fund them in any more than what we already do testing bore studs. So we're going to sample. So there's nothing wrong with sampling. It's just that sampling has some caveats, and we have to understand what we're doing before we go interpret those results. So here's the deal. If I go test 30 wean pigs, and I do that once a month, what does that say? Well, 30 pigs tested today means that the true prevalence rate, the number of infected pigs at weaning, if I have 30 negative tests today, the true status of those pigs is somewhere between 0 and 1.7% of them are infected. Somewhere between 0 and 1.7%. So you say, well, that doesn't sound like very much. Well, the problem is that 1% or that 2% is enough to make that group go positive in finishing, and now I've got a $2 drag on them. So with any sampling strategy, I've got to be very careful about how I interpret that and how many samples do I need to get. We'll talk a little bit about intensity of sampling in a standard process here in a bit. It took a more intensive than that, and we've shifted that to make it easier. But I think as we go through these transitionary states where I've got antibody-positive sows, previously infected sows, and I want to know the pig's true status, 30 may or may not be enough, and once a month may or may not be enough. I may have to test more intensively than that. And this is the key point. What did I tell you? Those farms puke out virus for a 3 to 6 week window. And it tends to be shorter rather than longer. So if it's a 3-week window and I test every 4 weeks, I got a 25% chance of missing it altogether, right? So I had positive pigs for 3 weeks and I just missed it. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with any of this. I just have to understand what I'm doing when I go interpret the results before I make management decisions off of them. So, everybody tells me, well, Jim, God, cleaning up these farms is so damn expensive. We can't afford to do this. I mean, I got to have pigs. I got to sell pigs. I got to have pigs to sell. I got to make breeding target. That's my favorite one. I got to make breeding target. None of you have ever said that, have you? Right? Okay. Well, let's talk about the money behind this. And so, I don't know if any of you listen to watch Susie Orman. If you drive as much as I do, like at 10 o'clock on Saturday night, driving back in the middle of nowhere, there's nothing on the radio, not even that bloody XM. And so there's stuff like Susie Orman, and you learn all kinds of stuff you really didn't need to know. I have a multitude of useless facts shoved in the back of my head from 10 o'clock at night drives on Friday night. So let's talk about the money. So we've got a reasonable data set, and actually Daryl's would say it's slightly bigger than this, but we think there's about a 2 PSY drag of running a farm positive compared to running it naive. That drag is probably partially that we don't grow the gilts quite as well. We think there's some drag associated with just the disease itself. There's some transmission, but we can pretty consistently document this 2 PSY drag. So let's do that, and let's say wean pigs are worth $35, and I realize they're worth more than that today, but their cost is about $35. So we've got $70 lost there. Then we talk about this shedding deal for 3 to 6 weeks and every 6 to 18 months, so a half to 1.5 periods per year. Okay? So if the event occurs for on average 4 weeks and it happens every 4 weeks, 4 weeks long, one event a year, the average of those two, about 8% of the pig flow is affected. If I've got a $6 bill on their head times $8 is about 50 cents per pig at 24 PSY is about $12 a sow a year. Daryl said that positive sow farm was 78. My math gets back to 82, and I did mine before I didn't even see Daryl's study. What I'm telling you is that PRRS positive sow farms, although they look okay, and although it's probably easier to get it done, there's real dollars on the table, and we think it's about $82. Over a 10-year period, that's the $2 million, right? It's $200,000 a year on a sow farm, 2,500 sow farm. So the question is, how do we move forward? This is my other favorite pushback. So I got PRRS positive pigs, and my farm blows up every year, and God, Doc, this really sucks, and I don't want to try to stabilize it and clean it up and get on with it, because when it blows up, I got PRRSitis, Doc. Sucks. Okay, that's the worst disease ever. It's not actually the PRRS, it's the bloody PRRSitis in the people, because they get defeated, and we don't go implement all the execution, all the little things that are really important. Okay? So, in spite of a lot of conjecture, when we do a fairly reasonable amount of modeling, at the end of the day, there's no economic value to having that sow farm positive when it gets a new virus in it. If it gets a truly new virus in it that they've never seen before, you get positive pigs for the same period of time, sure, there's a dip in PSY. There may be a slight difference in PSY productivity. Folks, sows are a necessary evil. If we could figure out how to clone those little boogers and not have to have a sow, we'd get rid of them tomorrow, right? We could just make widgets and put widgets in the barn and feed them. We'd be like the chicken guys. That's not the biology game we play. We have to have a sow. But the 2 PSY isn't nearly as big as that duration of shedding. And so that previous infection probably does not influence that duration of shedding, at least in the data sets that we've looked at fairly intensively. So how do I get there, right? So that's what we talked about. I actually asked Bob today why I came to this, why I agreed to speak. I thought, God, Lowe, you got a lot of stuff to do. What were you agreeing to do this for? And then I looked again at the title, and I remembered, Dreaming of a World Without PRRS. I thought, man, they must be passing out crack or something. Because it's the only way we're going to get there, right? I don't think so. I think we can move forward, and this is it. So this is a 3-step program. number one, we have to get the herd identified as to its proper status. And so this all gets back to how do I get status identified and then manage off of that status. So I'm going to use the AAV herd status. We'll talk about that in a minute. That's really 1 to 4. We're going to define some standardized testing. The testing I propose is certainly not written in stone. It certainly flexes over time, but at least it's standard and we can repeat it. And then really, how do we use these standardized management processes, to drive elimination of that virus as herd as possible? Because, right, what we know works today is if I get a new virus, I load, close, homogenize. Right? Those are the key steps. I'm not sure how you do the homogenization. I'm not sure it matters. Okay? That's not the point of this. It's what do I do the day after I close that herd? How do I manage that herd and how do I walk it forward? Okay, so talk a little bit about implementation. If you're going to get things done, right, and you want people to do things, it's all about repeatability. Now, if you all stop and think about yourselves and how you like to be managed, or how I like to be managed, I want to know what's coming, right? I want to know if Johnny asked me to do something, what's going to happen today? We always deal better with when it's consistent. Unfortunately, it's just like training a dog, right? What does the dog really like? Consistency. They want to know the rules. We can't achieve our best if we don't know what the rules are. So one, it's about repeatability. And to get repeatability and get consistency, we've got to let science drive it, and we've attempted to do that. It's about transparency, so everybody knows what's going on. There's no secrets here. I got to have the dude that's processing, executing at the same level as the owner of the company. Because if the dude that's processing, the dude that picks up the pig, doesn't execute on the plan today, I fail. Okay? And then it's about accountability, and so it's about getting the entire production leadership team to buy in and say, we are going to get this done, and holding people accountable up and down the chain. So this is some material I presented before, but it's really deal, right? So it's about defining the issue within the context of the system. So what I've attempted to do today is attempt to define what the issue is, which is how do we get the virus out of the farm and keep it out of the farm? Or at least keep the original virus, not a new virus, but how do we keep the original virus out of the farm? Once we define that, we're going to build a process which is really as simple as task, and I'll show you how we've organized that. Then we're going to go teach the task to the people, and we're going to monitor, and we're going to correct. Okay, it's a really simple process that we can repeat over and over again. So we believe that this is the pillars of this, right? So it's system understanding. Do I understand what the system is doing? Do I truly understand how the system makes decisions? So farm X or system X and system Y may have very different metrics of how they measure things. They may have very different approaches. They may have very different economic realities. That's okay. I just have to understand the process and design the process around how well I understand the system. This one's a non-negotiable. I have to understand biological correctness, so there's some biological facts and they can happen over and over again. This is a big one to me. I think a lot of times we do things to achieve the desired degree of difficulty, not do things just to make it happen. So simple is always better. When I was in graduate school, I had a faculty member tell me, Jim, if you need a lot of statistics to do analysis on your project, you need to go back and take your experimental design course again. Because your design should be elegant enough that the answers should be self-evident, i.e. it needs to be simple. And simplicity is what really works for people because they can get it. And then, oh my God, I have to talk to the people. And I have to talk to the people a lot, regularly. Okay? So it's understand where you're working in, get the biology right, make it simple enough so somebody can frickin' do it on Thursday afternoon. Right? That's my joke. I'm tiredest on Thursday afternoon. And so I figure if I can't do it on Thursday afternoon, nobody can get it done on Thursday afternoon, and that's my standard. It has to be simple enough for that. And please actually tell the people and listen to them what you're hitting. So let's talk about this. Let's define the issue. So I apologize, this is a bit small. This will all actually be published here and available quickly by the 1st of March. And so we will have this available at PRRS.org, I presume, is where we'll end up posting this. But first weekend in March, this will get trotted out at another meeting. But basically, we've got 4 categories, which is 1 is blowing and going, 4 is naive. Okay, so if you can kind of keep those on, the middle is mushy. 2 is the quote positive stable bucket, and we actually split that up into 3 buckets, which is short-term stable, undergoing elimination, and then really what we would call long-term stable. So that herd we're going to run positive stable over the long haul. These 2 steps are important in designing processes for elimination, and this 2A step is really how do I do the load, close, homogenize, clean up, eliminate the virus from the herd. 3 is actually provisional negative, so that's the elimination herd. It's a transitionary state where I've got positive and negative animals in the farm at the same time. So that's these categories have been well published in JSHAP, available certainly out there, and every veterinarian ought to have access. So then what do we do? So really gets around to testing after this. And so one we don't worry about. Let me show you what we do for testing on this side, and I think this is somewhat important. When we talk about herd closure, we talk about a 30-week process. And so because I know people don't like to jump the gun because they get impatient because 30 weeks is a long time, we don't start our testing process until we are 22 weeks in. We start that testing process at that point because I want 8 negative weeks of testing before I allow the herd to be opened up and transition to stage 3, which would be reopening the herd. So what I don't want to do is have 8 weeks of testing at less than 30 weeks because we've got enough information over the years to tell us that that is highly ineffective and results in failure. So I'm going to start with a minimum of 30 weeks. We test for 8 consecutive weeks. We test suckling pigs at the time of processing. We actually use a tail swab for that today. We've got confidence that those results are meaningfully different. We test pigs at the time of processing not because we think that's the ultimate end-all be-all test, but it gives us a really good read to say how many sows are still infected in gestation, how many pigs are being infected in utero. And if those pigs are infected in utero, it's going to be a long time before that sucker gets cleaned up. Then we go back and do the last 4 weeks of testing actually on wean pigs. So I know I've got negative pigs at birth. We continue to test the pigs at birth. Did I get them all the way out of the farrowing house negative by testing pigs at weaning? We test 60 a week. We pool those by 5, but the concept of 60 is really to go from what would be a 90-10 test, which is at 1 to 0 to 1.7% prevalence, down to a 0 to 0.1 prevalence. So we've got a lot more confidence than 95.5 test. So we really ratchet the pressure up to get more confidence in our results. Again, we do this with tail swabs, so they do it when they dock the pig. We do that at the time of processing at 3 to 4 days of age. Lay staff does it just while they're in the barn. The processing crew collects it. Doesn't add a lot of effort. It's really simple. We can get it done. So it kind of meets the, did we understand biological correctness and did we get simplicity so we can get it pulled off. So I won't bore you with this, but if you can sense what's going on here, basically at the end of the day, in this column this is gilt management practices. This is what are we doing, gilt and sow management practices. So there's things like introducing gilts and vaccines and changing needles between sows. And this bucket is what do we do in farrowing. So stuff like, we use a lot of warming tubs to split suckle pigs. Do we use those or do we not use those? This is really all based on the methods that we believe that virus can be transmitted in a farm. At the bottom is how do we cross-foster pigs in the unit. So we split it into 3 buckets. What do we do in the gestation barn practically? What do we do with respect to the equipment we're going to utilize in the farrowing house? And what do we do with pig movements? If you look at the grid here to here, you notice there's a lot more yeses and a lot more no's over here. This is a lot more restrictive on this side, i.e. we don't move any pigs, we change needles, et cetera, et cetera. Here, it's normal operating procedures. When we adapt this into a given system, we actually reference the exact protocol out of their protocol manual tied right into each one of these lines. Can you do protocol 14.2, yes or no? With a description around that. So we don't have any clarity as we try to put this out across lots and lots of herds of what are we doing, what are we not doing. Okay, all these practices have come straight out of the literature. We know that these things are yes or no in the literature to say that they are acceptable or not acceptable or key risk factors for internal transmission. Okay, so this is the cleanup deal. Talk a little bit about cost. And very briefly, James. Third closure, 30 weeks, we've talked about that. I highlighted this in-farm. When we load these farms today, we've had a couple of instances where we loaded the farm and put gilts in a gilt developer next to the farm, and they're not quieting down very well, so we've changed our process. So if they can't go physically in the gestation barn, they're not part of the herd closure. And then we start an off-site breeding project, and we utilize these techniques. So we're basically 15 weeks ahead of herd opening. We go start a breeding project off-site in some finisher somewhere. We figured that out, and we're highly successful. The breeding project is about $13 to $14 a sow. Smaller farms, it's slightly more expensive. Big farms, it's slightly less expensive. $5,000 is cheaper to do it than $2,500 because your barn rent works out better. So at the end of the day, if you just look at this, we think it's about a 10 to 12 week payback to go do that off-site breeding project. We keep these herds rolling, and we think we can eliminate virus fairly quickly. Caveats being that we get these standard management practices implemented and we move forward. So long-term summary. Long-term view, this is a long-term business, right? When I put a gilt in the herd, I'm stuck with her for 3 years, hopefully 3 years, maybe 4. So everything I do, I've got a thing in the sow business. It's not about next week. I know I have to make breeding target, but these are really long-term capital allocation decisions, and I have to think that way. If I think about that way, I can think about herd status, and then really it's just buying into the standard process, and then leadership pushing into the farm and saying, I'm going to get these things done.